welcome back for part two. We're going to talk about the two main genres that fed into the jazz scene and blues scene as it emerges in Chicago. And it's because these two traditions and genres of music came with the participants of the Great Migration up to the north in communities like Detroit, and again, our lens is on Chicago. I'm going to pull up my lecture notes so you can kind of follow along with me. Here we go. So again here, the Chicago style of jazz and blues came out of both the Mississippi Delta blues and New Orleans Dixieland style. And there were some major musicians that pioneered both of these genres like King Oliver, Jelly Roll Morton, and Louis Armstrong, and we're going to investigate a couple of those names later on in lecture. Certain aspects of song structure and rhythm set in the Chicago branch of music set apart in the 1920s, such as like a heavy string bass and guitar, longer solos, quick tempos. We're going to go through some of those other characteristics in greater detail in a bit. But this ultimately, just kind of thinking of it globally, set the foundation for swing music. Okay, so the trends that happen in Chicago establish the foundations of like a hot jazz and what we otherwise know as a swing style. But after World War II, jazz evolved throughout the decades, and following a decline in popularity in Chicago, many musicians ended up relocating to New York City, which was quickly becoming the new epicenter of jazz. And the only reason why I didn't discuss jazz in New York City in particular is because there's, again, a whole other class that's dedicated to just discussing, well, one, the history of jazz, and a lot of it is, again, centered in New York City, but also another course that is the music of New York City. So it's also discussed there. So decided to cover other topics and leave jazz just for Chicago in this case. However, the jazz community is still fairly robust in Chicago. There are active open air communities like Green Mill, which is in Chicago's north side uptown neighborhood. It's a spot that is definitely well known, and we'll talk about the Maxwell Street Market as well. And that's a historically preserved location that's, again, open air, and that's where a lot of our big names ended up having their the beginnings of their career, is playing in public places. Before we get there, I want to talk about Dixieland jazz. And Dixieland jazz started in New Orleans at the turn of the 20th century. So again, it is brewing and being developed before and during our time of Great Migration. And what we have in Dixieland jazz is a number of characteristics that set it apart from other jazz traditions. We have some common instruments listed here: the clarinet, trumpet, banjo, guitar, percussion, tuba, string bass. The one kind of outlier that looks a little strange, we do hear clarinet in some swing settings, again, swing being an outgrowth of some established traditions that are outlined in Chicago. But that's really one of the key instruments that sets apart Dixieland jazz opposed to anything else, in addition to this big point over here, the idea of inclusive and collective improvisation. So improvisation is the act of immediate musical composition. So in jazz, a lot of times you will play the tune at the head of a chart, and the internal guts of the piece will be working through of improvisations by performers that are happening live and in the moment. They're not written down ahead of time. They follow the chord changes that are outlined at the very beginning of the chart. And what's a little bit different here in the Dixieland style is that there's instead of these more polite solos where someone takes a solo and someone else hands it off to someone else, we have the full ensemble participating in this kind of jumble of sound. And it's usually within the bounds of simple time, a fairly safe, repetitive, metric feeling because we have so much activity that's happening within the texture. So as I said, and I think I've played some other Lincoln Center videos as a part of other lectures, but there's Lincoln Center Jazz has an education initiative and a couple of videos out there that are very illustrative. I have two of them that are focused on Dixieland in particular to give us an idea as to what all of the things that I just said actually sound like as played by an ensemble. So let me go ahead and pull up our first listening example.
Hi, my name is Vincent Gardner, trombonist for the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about New Orleans jazz. New Orleans was a special place for music at the turn of the last century. A major port city, it was home to many different types of people, each of whom had their own style of music. New Orleans had a great tradition of celebration, opera, military marching bands, folk music, the blues, different types of church music, ragtime, echoes of traditional African drumming, and all of the dance styles that went with this music could be heard and seen throughout the city. When all of those kinds of music blended into one, jazz was born. Some of the aspects of jazz from New Orleans include the Big Four rhythm. A front line of horns, as you see here, and the sound of collective improvisation, where each instrument lends a unique character and role to the music. 1, 2, Some of the founding fathers of jazz are Buddy Bolden, King Oliver, Jelly Roll Morton, and Louis Armstrong. These were some of the greatest musicians to come out of New Orleans, and their music and performances remain some of the finest art this country has produced. We're going to play the classic spiritual When the Saints Go Marching in the style of New Orleans jazz.
Really fun celebratory kind of style of music that does have a kind of marching sound to it. And again, this idea of collective improvisation is going to be one of the most identifiable features of this genre of jazz in particular. It happens here within this context of simple time that kind of has a march-like feel to it. And it's really in this genre and no other like this. Again, for me, the instrumental outliers here that really call to this style, in addition to the kind of square sounding drum set accompaniment, is the clarinet. So often when I hear the clarinet, in addition to that kind of percussive accompaniment, and it in the setting of some collective improvisation, which, by the way, creates imitative polyphony in texture. So everyone had their own take on the Saints Go Marching In melody. So That's one of the few instances in which we hear imitative polyphony where it makes a lot of sense to us. Non-imitative polyphony we hear significantly less often because they incorporate very different ideas, and it's hard for us to kind of wrap our brains around that. But before I leave the idea of collective improvisation, I have one more video from the Jazz Academy at Lincoln Center.
Hi, my name is Evan Christopher. I'm a musician based in New Orleans, Louisiana, and today we're going to talk about one of my favorite elements of the New Orleans style, and that's collective improvisation. So with my friends Vincent Gardner, John Eric Kelso, and Eli Yeaman, we're going to show you how that's done on an old blues song called Careless Love, sometimes Loveless Love, and it's tributed to W.C. Handy. John's going to play the melody, and then Vincent's going to add his voice to emphasize some of the roots of the chords. There, you heard John state the melody very beautifully, and in the second chorus, you heard Vincent adding the bass notes to the chords and embellish them a little bit. Now, what I love about the New Orleans jazz style is what the clarinet gets to do. I get to provide melodic counterpoint, but also provide the pivotal harmonic relationships and connect the harmonies using voice leading. In these next two choruses, I'm going to add my part with just arpeggios. And then the chorus after that, I'm going to smooth it out by using voice leading, and I'm going to be more thoughtful about the notes in the chord that I'm choosing so that they're connected in a more logical and melodic way.
Okay, so let me dissect what he just said, which was super musical. Okay. In the first round through the melody, what he's going to be doing is more accompaniment, really supporting the melody, which is going to be played in the trumpet. In the second round through, he's going to be more of what we call counterpoint, which is creating a kind of rich call and response texture with the trumpet part and also the trombone part, which is more accompanimental, but stretching the boundaries of it. Everyone's playing their line in a very, what I call horizontal way, meaning that they're thinking about their instruments very melodically, and stacking melodies on top of one another is going to create polyphony and texture. So we're going to, in essence, go from something that's slightly more simple in texture to something that's more complicated in texture in the second round through. All right, back to our listening example.
Now let's see if we can't find those harmonies and make it smoother. Now, we can even get more musical than that. Remember, collective improvisation is about creating an arrangement on the spot. So one of the ways we do that is by paying more attention to the phrasing. So Vince and I on this next chorus are going to leave a little more space and be thoughtful about where we're placing these ideas and where we're putting the voice leading. And in the chorus after that, we're all going to step it up a little bit by using some of the expressive language of our instruments and get some real feeling. Here's some feeling now.
Oh, wonderful. So, a great example here of the ways in which texture can kind of push and pull, ebb and flow. It doesn't necessarily, like, one instrument can be a part of one category, accompanimental, and then branch out into being something that's more melodic in nature. And that's one of the, I think, great appeals to the Dixieland style in particular is that not everyone is sort of subservient to traditional roles. Everyone kind of gets to step out and be a little bit of a soloist during the participation of playing some of these tunes. So hopefully this gives you a good idea of what you're going to be listening out for as the genre foundations for the Chicago jazz style, again, coming through the Great Migration. The other tradition is, of course, more blues oriented. Let me go ahead and pull my lecture notes back up. Here we go. We also have, like I said, the Mississippi Delta blues or Delta jazz as a genre that is brought with the people of the Great Migration. A number of the artists, by the way, mentioned in the last video were, a part of, like Louis Armstrong, for example, Dixieland jazz musician, also a part of the Chicago jazz scene, but also moved over to New York, a really vibrant career for that particular musician. So, if you want a more thoughtful glance at Dixieland jazz as it pertains to the performances of Louis Armstrong, check out the listening example that I noted in the lecture notes. But Delta blues, on the other hand, ended up emphasizing solo singing or performances by soloists, meaning one person, usually one person singing while accompanying themselves on the guitar. And because of the limited number of instruments that you had within this typical configuration, much different than the Dixieland style, there were a number of kind of extended techniques crafted for the guitar, bottleneck or slide guitar being one of them, that like portamento or wah, wah, sound that is often actually done with a metal slide that's placed on a finger, or the neck of a glass bottle that gives it that particular that sound that's associated with this genre. One of the artists that ended up being particularly influential on the Chicago blues scene because he taught one of the principal artists is Charlie Patton. So we're going to go ahead and take a listen to him as an example of Delta blues.
Will you kill my man? Yes, I will. Dead by the I'm a fool about don't take me long to get my you know I need my it means on Pines Moon the lifetime. Dead by the I ain't long. Bye bye now. All I want is this vision. I go to bed, you don't wanna fight about her. Look at your baby, would you slap me? Yes, I will. Get by the you know I'm a fool. Bye bye. Would you kill my man? Yes, I will. You know I'll kill him. Get by the for every man that you see is fool about it. You know, baby, I mean that old. I want to hit the gym with her.
So in direct contrast to Dixieland as a genre, it's going to have much different instrumentation. So as a result, and because we don't have this element of collective improvisation, the texture that's going to be represented in Delta blues is going to be generally homophonic, much more homophonic than heterophonic even. Again, because we're preferencing performances by solo players. As a result, though, we're still using things within the boundaries of simple time for the most part. We're going to try to explore interesting timbres and tone colors within the guitar and the voice. So in the last example that we heard, Spoonful Blues, we heard different expressions of spoken text and sung text, not so much of any exploration within the guitar playing, but we're going to hear those within the 5 artists that we trace as a part of our Chicago blues exploration of that genre. So speaking of which, that's going to be what we talk about in part 3. And part 4, we'll talk about the Chicago jazz scene, which follows a little bit more along the route of the New Orleans style. So see you back for part 3 shortly.